Robert Williams had always been considered a lucky man. At 50, he owned a thriving construction company, had been married for 25 years to Helen, a dedicated teacher, and was the father of two children, Michelle, 22, a law graduate, and Peter, 19, an engineering student. The house in the upscale neighborhood, imported cars in the garage, annual vacations, everything seemed to compose the scenery of a successful life. But Robert felt an emptiness he couldn't explain, a dull ache that grew in his chest each morning. Routine had become an invisible prison. Conversations with Helen always revolved around the children and domestic obligations, and he found himself looking in the mirror with tired eyes, questioning where the young dreamer of yesteryear had gone. Melancholy took hold of him in the silent nights when everyone slept and he was alone with his thoughts. "Is this it?" he whispered to himself. "Is this how life should be until the end?" It was during the office renovation that Robert met Julia, and something changed profoundly within him. She was 19, studying interior design and working part-time at the decoration company contracted for the project. Long curly hair, an easy smile, and a contagious energy that made Robert's heart race in a way he had forgotten was possible. Initially, they were just professional conversations about colors, furniture, and layout. But gradually, Robert began inventing excuses to visit the office more frequently, feeling a sweet and dangerous anxiety with each encounter. Julia talked about her dreams of opening her own studio, about the travels she wanted to take, about the life she still had ahead. And Robert saw himself reflected in those young, bright eyes, remembering when he too was 19 and believed everything was possible. "She makes me feel alive again," Robert thought, his heart beating strongly whenever he heard her footsteps in the hallway. What began as a silent attraction soon transformed into casual coffee meetings. Robert justified himself by saying he was just helping a talented young woman with professional advice, but his hands trembled subtly when she smiled, and a painful guilt mixed with euphoria took over his thoughts. For the first time in years, he felt butterflies in his stomach. Julia, in turn, was impressed by Robert's maturity and stability. Coming from a simple family, she had never met someone so successful who showed such interest in her dreams. Robert introduced her to sophisticated restaurants, theaters, art exhibitions, a completely new world for her that made her feel special, almost like a princess in a fairy tale. "You make me feel young again," Robert confessed one night after the theater, his voice choked with emotion. "And you make me feel special," Julia replied, not realizing the weight her words would have in the future, nor the storm that was approaching. Helen began to notice subtle changes in her husband's behavior, and a chill in her stomach grew each day. The phone calls he answered in another room, work meetings that extended late into the night, the different perfume on his shirt. Anxiety consumed her from within, but she was afraid to confront the truth. When she finally had the courage, Robert denied everything with a vehemence that only confirmed her worst suspicions. The discovery came through a photo on Robert's phone that he forgot to lock. Helen saw the image of Robert and Julia at a restaurant, her wearing a necklace he had said he lost. The world collapsed. Her legs trembled, air was lacking, and 25 years of marriage shattered before her eyes in a matter of seconds. 25 years, Robert! 25 years thrown away for a girl our son's age!" Helen screamed, between tears of rage and pain that seemed to tear her chest. Her voice echoed through the house like a lament. "You don't understand, Helen. I feel dead here. With her, I started dreaming again," Robert replied, surprising himself with his own cruel honesty, watching the heart of the woman he once loved shatter before him. The children were torn between shock and revolt. Michelle, already an adult, tried to mediate the situation with tears in her eyes, while Peter refused to speak to his father, disappointment transforming into pure rage.
Robert found himself facing a choice that would forever change the lives of all the people he loved, feeling like a man walking on broken glass.
Julia began to feel the weight of judgmental stares when they went out together, as if she carried an invisible scarlet letter. Friends her age looked at her with strangeness and whispers, and she felt displaced among Robert's older friends, like a child pretending to be an adult. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living a life that isn't mine," Julia confessed one night, her voice laden with a sadness that shouldn't exist at 19. "My friends are living experiences typical of our age, and I'm here, taking care of a serious relationship as if I were a 40-year-old woman." Robert, in turn, began to realize that recreating youth wasn't as simple as he had imagined. Interests were different, cultural references didn't align, and he found himself explaining jokes or contexts that were obvious to his generation. The sense of displacement grew like a shadow between them. 6 months after the separation, Robert faced a crisis in the company due to stress and divided attention. Some longtime clients, who were family friends, canceled contracts. Helen, who had always been his main business advisor, was no longer there to help with difficult decisions. Professional loneliness was added to emotional loneliness. Michelle passed the bar exam, but Robert wasn't invited to the graduation party. The absence hurt more than any physical stab. Peter changed his major, claiming he no longer wanted anything that reminded him of his father. Helen, after months of therapy and shed tears, began rebuilding her life, enrolling in a master's program she had always postponed. Was it worth it? Robert questioned himself while looking at photos of his children in his new apartment, the silence answering for him.
One weekend, while Julia was visiting family, Robert found himself alone for the first time in months. It was then that reality hit him with full force, like an avalanche of regret. He had traded 25 years of history, children who loved him unconditionally, and a partner who knew his flaws and qualities, for an intense but perhaps fleeting passion. He called Helen, but she didn't answer. The ringtone echoed like a funeral bell. He tried to talk to his children, but only Michelle responded, politely but distant as an iceberg. He realized he had burned bridges that might never be rebuilt, and the weight of this awareness was almost unbearable. When Julia returned from the trip, she brought a different air, as if she had breathed purer air. She had reconnected with school friends, people her age living life without the complications of a relationship with so many social implications. "Robert, I need to tell you something," she said, with an unusual seriousness that made his heart race for different reasons this time. "I have an opportunity to study abroad in France. It's a full scholarship to study design. It's always been my dream." Robert faced that news like a mirror that finally reflected the naked truth. Julia was 19 and deserved to live all the experiences that youth offers, without carrying the weight of his crises and regrets. He was 50 and had destroyed a family trying to relive something that no longer existed. "Go," he said, surprising himself with his own serenity that masked deep pain. "You have to live your life." "And you? Will you be okay?" Julia asked, with genuine care and concern in her young eyes. "I'll learn to be," Robert replied, his voice almost a whisper laden with melancholy. 2 years later, Robert slowly rebuilt his relationship with his children, like someone reconstructing a house brick by brick. He never returned to Helen. Some mistakes have no way back. Some wounds don't heal completely. But he learned to respect her new life and live with the consequences of his choices like a man carrying an invisible cross. Julia graduated in France and opened a small studio. Sometimes they meet by chance on the streets, exchange a few cordial words, and go their separate ways. There's no resentment, just the silent awareness that it was an intense story, but one that belongs to the past, like a faded photograph. Helen remarried, this time to a fellow teacher, and found a more mature and serene happiness, like someone who learns to value peace after the storm. The children, after a long time, managed to forgive their father, understanding that he was, above all, a human being with flaws and weaknesses. Robert never married again. He learned to live alone, to value true friendships, and to understand that youth isn't recovered through another person, but through accepting each phase of life with its own beauties and challenges. The lonely nights now brought reflection instead of despair. The question that gives this story its title, Love or Interest, perhaps has no simple answer. It was probably a bit of both, mixed with midlife crisis, fear of aging, and a desperate search to feel alive again. What remains is the painful lesson that some decisions, once made, forever change the course of our lives and the lives of those we love, and that sometimes the price of freedom can be higher than we imagined we were willing to pay. Time does not go backward, but it doesn't stop either. And perhaps true wisdom lies in living intensely each phase of life, without trying to repeat or anticipate any of them. Robert's final reflection, written in his personal diary during the silent nights of his new life.